Wild horses were protected as part of the Wild Horse and Burro Act in 1971, and since then the BLM has been mandated to manage the wild horses throughout the West, 11 western states.
Today, wild horses and burros can be found all through the West Desert, with additional herds near Price and even in the Uinta Basin. Currently, wild horse populations are over what the BLM terms appropriate management levels, by 14,000 nationally and 1,300 here in Utah. In the past, the BLM has gathered wild horses off of the range and either put them up for adoption or put them into long-term holding.
We don't have enough adopters to be able to adopt all the horses that we remove off the range, and so the horses that aren't adopted, they go into holding.
Pushing long-term holdings upwards of 50,000 horses. With an estimated lifetime cost of $44,000 per horse, the numbers of warehousing them become staggering. Holding these horses cost taxpayers $46 million in 2013, or about 64% of the $76 million budget spent by the BLM managing wild horses and burros. Beyond the hard costs, there is also an impact on the range.
There's a lot of animals that depend on the land to make a living. There's the wild horses, there's wildlife, and then there's livestock operators. And livestock operators and wild horses can compete for forage. The biggest difference is the livestock operator, through management, it's a little easier on the ground than having the horses out here year round.
The BLM has asked ranchers in some affected areas to voluntarily reduce their herds by as much as half, leaving ranchers wondering why they are making substantial sacrifices, while the BLM seemingly does nothing to control wild horse populations. This last spring, the problem reached a boiling point with local governments, prompting them to set up traps on private land and telling the BLM, "Gather up these horses, or we will." The BLM has since gathered 26 horses off of private lands, with authorization to remove up to 200 wild horses from the ranges in Utah, 50 of which can come from private lands. There isn't a single threat or solution to the problems that we are seeing out on the range. But what can be done from here? We will discuss that in our roundtable. For the county seat,
Welcome
I'm
back
Derek
to the
Dowsett.
county seat. We are today talking about the wild horse and burro situation in the state of Utah. We spent the first 10 minutes with the BLM talking to Gus War, who is the state lead for the horses, and in our interview we discussed that he has so far got an authorization to collect 200 head of horses for Utah, 50 off of private land, and so far they've captured 26. They have got themselves a bunch of constraint, but they also say this is not the worst state in the West, because Nevada's got a population of 25,000 horses and burros, and Utah's is much smaller. So with that being said, we're going to switch our attention here to the county side of the argument. Joining us for a conversation today, Mark Ward from the Utah Association of Counties, our public lands attorney, Commissioner J.R. Nelson from Emery County, which has more than its fair share of burros, I understand. In our conversation with the BLM is that Gus said their hands are tied because Washington only allows so much, and they're trying to get more money to get more places to keep more horses and burros at different places in the country. And that he said that policies are what's strangling it and making it hard to accomplish, and they're doing the best they can. So what say you to that?
They're spending 2/3 of their money allotted for horse and burro care or treatment management on warehousing them. And that's, they're, to my way of thinking, wasting too much money just warehousing them instead of managing them according to the Wild Horse and Burro Act. And if they'd follow the Wild Horse and Burro Act, things would be much simpler, but it's not very popular.
Mark, from a legal standpoint.
There's no authority in the Wild Horse and Burro Act to do long-term penning up of these horses. Their only option is either to try to put them up for adoption. First of all, eliminate the old and lame and sick animals. Try to put them up for adoption. If adoption fails, destroy them. Now I realize they don't have financial authority to do that from Congress, but the Act gives them still another option, and that is to sell them, to put them on the open market at an auction and sell them without limitation. The backbone of the BLM's Wild Horse and Burro program right now is something the Act does not even authorize, and that is put them in a pen indefinitely with no view towards selling or no view towards adoption. That's why they don't have any money. They're spending their money on areas they don't have any authority to do. If they would simply follow the Act, then the problem would go away and they could get rid of them. And their obligation, by the way, under the Act is when they find that there are excess horses or burros that exceed the management levels called for by the plan, they have a duty to immediately remove them. And that's not my word, that's right out of the U.S. Code. Immediately remove those and get back to AML levels through either one of those three means. Eliminate old and sick, try to find adoption, or destroy or sell. Those are their only options.
And if I can quote Shakespeare here, we were all born to die. That includes horses. And it sounds really mean to euthanize or destroy these animals, but if you let the numbers continue to grow by huge leaps and bounds, sooner or later some catastrophic event is going to kill them, and it's going to be much uglier than euthanasia by the kindest means that you can do it. We have grazers on the Santa Fe Swell where we have large numbers of horses and burros who spend a lot of money, purchased grazing rights, and have never been able to put out the full number of cattle to use up their AUMs or the full length of time that they should have been allowed to be there. And these are people whose livelihood depends on grazing issues on the Santa Fe Swell.
Okay, now Gus did argue today that part of the problem is exacerbated by the drought. He didn't say it's any one thing. He said adoptions are down. He said that they're running out of space to hold them, and he gave me a whole list of things.
Fair enough, Chad, but guess what? When drought hits, grazers cut their grazing level. Why aren't horses cut? Why do grazers always have to give way? Why aren't horses removed?
The cowboys are the only ones who make a positive cut. The horses are not cut. As a matter of fact, I know of places where the cowboys were hauling extra water because the horses were coming in and drinking the water that they had hauled for their cattle's use. Cowboys supporting horses for which they get nothing. They just get the cuts.
How do we solve the problem?
I'll throw out one. There's two or three things need to happen. I think there's only one long-term fix to this, and that is to transfer jurisdiction back to the states for the management of wild horses and burros. States are only ones, as I know, that have the will to really follow the prescription of the Wild Horse and Burro Act. Let's just adopt that act as part of state law, and let's have the states carry it out. Let's have the states responsibly do either elimination of old animals, adoption and or destruction or sale.
And one of the big issues is we have to look at HB 148, that is transfer of public lands to the state, which I support. However, the things they eliminate are national monuments, national parks, Forest Service, and horses and burros. That's an issue that has to be addressed by the transfer of public lands to the state. The state is going to have to deal with wild horses and burros.
Well, is the state afraid to do it? Are they afraid of its cost, or?
I can only guess, but yes, it is expensive. But that is something that's going to have to be dealt with.
But apparently it's much less expensive if you do what the law says as opposed to what they're doing.
If you follow the wild horse and burro law, it is less expensive to deal with them. No place does it say warehouse these animals, and that's what's being done, and it's very lucrative. You know, as a matter of fact, as a part-time gentleman farmer, I could make more money feeding wild horses and burros than I can running a herd of cows. Their money's there.
I mean, I hate to say it, but there's a market for horse products. And it's not such a terrible thing to admit. It's been that way for decades. And the horses were under control, but a different culture has sunk in, and all of a sudden, managing horses reasonably is like taboo.
And the way we handle large herds of elk or deer, we trim them with hunts. Why can't we trim a herd of horses or wild burros down to a manageable size in the same way. Sell them off. Let people use the parts that they can use. And again, they're born to die, but if they die of a catastrophic event, it's an ugly death.